In the living room, he found his father asleep in an armchair, his arms folded across his chest and a blanket on his lap. There was something disarming in his pose that made Robbie stand still and watch him. He had never considered how elderly his father was now, choosing in his absence to remember him as a younger man with darker, fuller hair and a defined jawline. I've always been a storyteller, even as a young child. I used to tell my sisters stories before we went to bed at night. I used to write stories, even in primary school, that were always very adventurous. From a very young age, I've wanted to write, and I've been very conscious that writing is almost something that I was created to do. It's almost like I don't have a choice. I grew up in Northern Ireland. I've also lived in Zimbabwe and South Africa and Dublin, where I studied a Masters of Philosophy and Creative Writing at Trinity College. And I currently live in Belfast with my husband Sam and my one-year-old son Finlay. I started writing My Father's House in 2008. I was living in Dromore at the time in a house that very much inspired the setting for the novel, and the countryside surrounding it. All of that was very influential in terms of what the novel then became. I had just a male character in my head who I started sort of writing conversations with him to try and work out who he was and what his background was, and he kind of came to life over time. And I really didn't like him, which is the most interesting part of it. I didn't like even writing about him, but there was something about him that I just couldn't move on from him. I couldn't forget him. So the novel then became primarily about him. And what I found interesting in writing it was how he interacts then with the other characters, and they were all significant characters to me, but he was the one that I wanted to kind of look at and develop. The setting for the novel, the old farmhouse, was very significant as well. The house has fallen into a state of disrepair. There's a lot of outbuildings that were once used to house pigs, and greenhouses that once had things growing in them but that have now sort of been overrun. The tools once used in the garden have sort of rusted. Old carpets and old wallpaper, and just really a house that's not that fit for human habitation. And it became quite symbolic of how the family had disintegrated. The farmhouse then used to be a family home where they all lived and were together, but then in the novel it's just the father lives there, and none of the rest of the family live there, and that became quite symbolic of how the family relationships had disintegrated so much. In the majority of Robbie's memories, his father had his back turned. He was either leaving the house for the pub or retreating into an outside shed with a bottle of something. Yet in front of him sat a withered version of a man, riddled with disease and shrinking in clothes that at one time had fitted him so well. I think I've had a real journey. My writing used to be very flowery and it was all about the adjectives, but over time it's become incredibly sort of pared back. And now it's really important to me that I portray something accurately. And in My Father's House covers just very commonplace themes of coming home, of dysfunctional relationships. And it doesn't have any kind of big event. It's just about trying to portray something that's real.